My stepmother kicked me out the day I turned 18. She said I inherited a worthless carriage house, and what I found inside didn't just save me, it taught me what the word home really means. If you've ever felt lost, or like you didn't have a place in the world, this story is for you. Stick around, maybe even hit that subscribe button, because we're going to talk about finding our way back. The box was already on the porch when I got home from my shift at the diner. It wasn't a big box, just a standard cardboard one sealed with packing tape, my name scrawled on top in my stepmother's sharp, impatient handwriting, Leo. She didn't even use my full name, just the short, clipped version she always used, the one that made me feel like a temporary inconvenience. I stood there on the cracked concrete steps, the key to the front door feeling heavy and useless in my hand. It was October, and the air had that thin, cold bite that promises a hard winter. For 2 years, since my dad's truck had slid on a patch of black ice and wrapped around an oak tree, this house had been a place I slept, not a place I lived. Diane, my stepmother, had made that clear in 1,000 small ways. The way she moved my dad's photos from the mantelpiece to a box in the attic. The way my place at the dinner table became a stool at the kitchen counter. The way her new boyfriend, Mark, would look straight through me when he came in. I knew this day was coming. 18. The magic number that turned a legal responsibility into a voluntary kindness. And Diane was fresh out of voluntary kindness. I nudged the box with my foot. It was lighter than I expected. I pictured my life packed inside. A few changes of clothes, some dog-eared paperbacks, my high school diploma, the framed photo of my mom and me at the beach. Everything I owned in the world. I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs, and turned the key in the lock. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Usually, the TV was on, or Diane's 2 little kids from her first marriage were making a racket. Today, there was only a deep, humming silence. She was sitting at the kitchen table, a mug of tea steaming in front of her, a stack of envelopes next to it. She didn't look up when I came in. "Your things are on the porch," she said, her voice flat. "There's a bus ticket to Coldwater in that top envelope. It leaves at 7 tomorrow morning." I didn't say anything. I just stood in the doorway between the hall and the kitchen, the worn linoleum cool beneath the thin soles of my work shoes. I could feel the house rejecting me, its atoms rearranging to push me out. "Coldwater," I finally managed to say. The name was a faint echo from a life I barely remembered, a place my mom used to talk about. Her hometown. "Your grandmother," Diane said, finally looking at me. Her eyes were tired, but there was a hard glint of relief in them. "You know, your mother's mother, Clara. She left you something in her will. It's all been tied up in probate since she passed, but it cleared now that you're of legal age. My lawyer got the notification last week." I stared at her. My grandmother Clara. I had a vague memory of a woman with flour on her hands and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. She'd disappeared from my life when I was 6 or 7. My dad had told me she'd moved away, that she was difficult, that she'd cut ties with everyone. He never spoke of her again. "She's dead?" "Years ago," Diane said, taking a sip of her tea. She pushed the stack of envelopes across the table. "This is all of it. The deed, the keys, a letter from her lawyer. It's a carriage house, apparently. Part of some old estate just outside of town." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Don't get your hopes up. The lawyer said it's been vacant for a decade. It's probably falling down. He called it a liability, mostly. You'll have property taxes to deal with." A liability. A worthless, falling down carriage house in a town I didn't know, left by a grandmother I couldn't remember. This was my inheritance, my grand send-off into the world. "So that's it?" I asked, and my voice was steadier than I expected. "I take this and I go?" That's it, she confirmed, not a flicker of emotion on her face. Leo, this was never going to be permanent. You know that. I have my own family to think about now. Mark and I are getting married. We need the space. She looked around the kitchen, at the life she was building, a life that had no room for me. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. All the fight had been drained out of me over the last 2 years, replaced by a dull, quiet ache. I just nodded. I walked over to the table, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the silence, and picked up the thick manila envelope. It felt heavy, not with promise, but with the weight of finality. Inside, I could feel the cold, hard shape of a key. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, out of the house, and closed the front door softly behind me. I didn't slam it. I didn't look back. I just picked up my box, walked down the cracked concrete steps for the last time, and headed toward the distant glow of the bus station. I had a liability to claim. I found a cheap motel near the bus station, the kind with a flickering neon sign and carpets that smelled of stale smoke and disinfectant. I paid for one night with the last $70 from my paycheck, the cash feeling thin and inadequate in my hand. The room was small, the wallpaper peeling in one corner, the single bed covered with a thin, faded quilt. I dropped my box on the floor and sat on the edge of the mattress, the springs groaning in protest. The silence in the room was different from the silence at Diane's house. That was an angry, resentful silence. This was just empty, a void. I pulled the large envelope from my jacket pocket and dumped its contents onto the bed. A bus ticket, just as she'd said. A set of old-fashioned iron keys on a simple steel ring. A thick, folded document that looked like a deed, full of dense legal language. And a business-sized envelope with the name of a law firm printed in the corner. Davies and Finch, attorneys at law. I opened that one first. The letter inside was on heavy cream-colored paper, the text crisp and formal. It was addressed to me, Leo Vance. It briefly explained that my grandmother, Clara Vance, had passed away 8 years ago. It stated that her sole asset, a property described as the Carriage House and associated parcel of land at 112 Old Mill Road, was held in trust until my 18th birthday. It was now legally mine. The letter was signed by a Mr. Alistair Davies, senior partner. He invited me to call his office upon my arrival in Coldwater to discuss the particulars of the inheritance and a standing offer from a local development concern. A standing offer. The phrase snagged in my mind. Why would anyone be making an offer on a worthless, falling-down building? Diane's words echoed in my head. A liability. She'd made it sound like a burden, a cursed thing I was being saddled with. But developers don't make offers on things that are truly worthless. I tucked the letter back into its envelope. My fingers brushed against the keys. There were 2 of them. One was large and ornate, made of black iron with a complex, cloverleaf-shaped head. The other was smaller, simpler, a standard brass key. They were cold to the touch, heavy with a significance I couldn't yet understand. They were the only real things I had left from a family I'd thought was gone completely. I lay back on the lumpy mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling. Sleep felt a million miles away. My mind was a whirlwind of half-formed memories of my grandmother. The smell of baking bread. The feel of her calloused but gentle hands showing me how to tie a knot. A song she used to hum while she worked in her garden. They were like faded photographs, blurry and indistinct. Why did she leave? Why did my dad say she was difficult? Why did she leave me this one specific thing? And why did she structure it so I couldn't have it until I was an adult and alone? It felt less like a gift and more like a riddle, or a test. The next morning, I was at the bus station before the sun came up. The air was frigid and my breath plumed in front of me. I bought a coffee and a stale pastry from a vending machine and sat on a hard plastic bench, my box at my feet, the envelope with the keys tucked safely in my inside jacket pocket. I was the only person waiting for the 7 a.m. bus to Coldwater. When it finally pulled in with a hiss of air brakes, it looked as tired and worn out as I felt. The journey was 5 hours through a landscape of flat, empty fields and skeletal trees. I watched the world go by, feeling like a ghost. I was leaving the only life I'd ever known, heading toward a complete unknown. It was terrifying. But underneath the fear, a tiny, unfamiliar feeling was starting to flicker. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was more like curiosity. For the first time in 2 years, I wasn't just waiting for the next bad thing to happen. I was moving towards something. I had a destination. I had a key. When the bus finally rumbled into Coldwater, the town looked exactly like its name. It was a small, quiet place nestled in a river valley, the buildings made of old brick and stone. The sky was a vast, unforgiving gray. A cold wind swept down the main street, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. I got off the bus with my box and stood on the sidewalk, feeling utterly out of place. I had no phone, no one to call. Just an address on a piece of paper and a lawyer's name. I found a payphone, a relic I was surprised still existed, and used my last few coins to call the office of Davies and Finch. A crisp, professional voice answered. "Mr. Davies is expecting you, Mr. Vance. Our office is on the corner of Main and Elm, 3rd floor." Mr. Davies's office was what you'd expect. Walls of dark wood, shelves filled with thick leather-bound books, a large desk that commanded the room. He was an older man, probably in his late 60s, with kind eyes and a weary but gentle smile. He stood up and shook my hand firmly. "Leo, I'm Alistair Davies. I was your grandmother's lawyer. And her friend." He gestured for me to sit. "I'm sorry about the circumstances of our meeting. Your stepmother's lawyer was abrupt." I just nodded, placing the envelope on his desk. "She said it's a liability." Mr. Davies picked up the envelope and tapped it gently on his desk. "Diane has a particular way of looking at the world," he said dryly. "To her, anything that doesn't produce immediate cash is a liability." Your grandmother, Clara, saw things differently. He leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. "Leo, the carriage house is not worthless. It's old, yes, it's neglected, but it's on a very valuable piece of land. The old Millhouse estate borders the river. A developer, Northwood Properties, has been buying up all the parcels for the last 5 years. They want to build luxury condos. Your grandmother's property is the last holdout. It's a key piece of their puzzle." He paused, letting the information sink in. "They've made a standing offer. $400,000. I stared at him. The number didn't seem real. It was more money than I had ever imagined seeing in my life. $400,000. Enough to go anywhere, do anything. Enough to start a new life, a secure life. They want you to take the offer," Mr. Davies continued, his voice neutral. "They're prepared to close quickly. The money would be in your account within a week." He slid a glossy brochure across the desk. It showed a sleek, modern condominium complex with glass balconies overlooking a sparkling river. "River's Edge Estates," the text proclaimed. "Luxury living, naturally." And right in the middle of the architectural drawing, where a road was supposed to go, was a small, awkward blank space. My blank space. My carriage house. "Why didn't my grandmother sell?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "She could have used that money." Mr. Davies sighed, a deep, heavy sound. "That's a question only Clara could answer. She was a very determined woman. She loved that place. She instructed me very clearly. The property was to be held for you, no one else. And when you turned 18, you were to be given the keys, the deed, and their offer. The choice was to be yours and yours alone. He looked at me, his gaze steady and searching. She left you something else, too. A safe deposit box at the local bank. I have the key here. She said you should go to the Carriage house first. She said you'd know what to do after that. He slid a small, numbered key across the desk. It looked like the other brass key on my ring. Leo, he said, his professional tone softening. Your grandmother was not a difficult woman. She was protective, fiercely so. I think you'll understand why when you see the place she left for you. The walk to 112 Old Mill Road took about 20 minutes. It was on the far edge of town, where the neat houses with their manicured lawns gave way to something wilder. The road itself turned from pavement to gravel, flanked by overgrown woods. The air grew colder, smelling of pine needles and damp soil. I passed a rusted, wrought-iron gate that must have once been the entrance to the main estate. One of its hinges was broken, and it hung open like a broken jaw. The grand house it once guarded was long gone, replaced by a field of weeds and wildflowers. But a little farther down the road, tucked behind a thick stand of ancient oak trees, was another, smaller structure, the Carriage house. It was larger than I'd imagined, a 2-story building made of dark, weathered stone and heavy timber beams. The roof was slate, and while some tiles were missing, it wasn't caved in. It looked less like it was falling down and more like it was sleeping. It was solid, enduring. A thick carpet of moss grew on the north-facing wall, and ivy crept up one side, framing a large, arched window on the second floor. The main doors were massive, made of heavy oak, bleached gray by years of sun and rain. They were designed for horses and carriages, not people. To the left of the great doors was a smaller, human-sized door. That had to be it. My heart was pounding as I walked up the 3 stone steps to the door. I felt like I was approaching a tomb or a sanctuary. I sorted through the keys Mr. Davies had given me. The big, ornate iron key was for the main carriage doors. The smaller brass one was for this door. I slid it into the lock. It was stiff from disuse, and I had to jiggle it, putting my shoulder into the door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, groaning complaint of metal on metal, the lock turned. The sound echoed in the profound quiet of the woods. I pushed the door open. It swung inward on protesting hinges into a world of dust and shadows. The air that rolled out was thick and musty, the smell of trapped time. It smelled of old wood, dry earth, and something else, something faint and floral, like dried lavender. I hesitated on the threshold, my box of belongings feeling flimsy and insignificant. I was stepping out of my life and into someone else's, into my grandmother's. I took a step inside, and the door swung shut behind me with a soft click, plunging me into near darkness. A few thin beams of light sliced through the grime on the windows, illuminating swirling galaxies of dust motes. My eyes slowly adjusted. I was in a large, open space. The ground floor was paved with cobblestones, worn smooth over the centuries. To one side, I could see the faint outlines of horse stalls, their wooden partitions still intact. On the other side was a large, empty space where a carriage would have been parked. A heavy wooden staircase with a thick, carved banister led up to the second floor. Everything was covered in a uniform layer of gray dust, a soft blanket that softened all the hard edges. It was like a scene from a fairy tale, a place put to sleep by a magic spell. I set my box down on a dusty workbench. In the center of the main floor was a huge shape covered by a canvas tarpaulin. It was massive, the size of a small car. Curiosity got the better of me. I walked over, my footsteps echoing in the vast space, and took a corner of the heavy canvas. I pulled it back. Underneath was not a carriage, but a truck. An old Ford pickup from the 1950s, its paint a faded seafoam green, its chrome grille dulled by time, but not rusted through. It was beautiful. It looked like it had been parked there yesterday, perfectly preserved under its canvas shroud. Why would she keep this? I let the canvas fall back into place and turned my attention to the rest of the ground floor. Tucked into one of the old horse stalls was a collection of garden tools, their wooden handles smooth with use. There were shovels, rakes, a wheelbarrow. In another stall, shelves were lined with clay pots of all sizes, all empty. It was clear this place hadn't been about horses for a very long time. It had been a workshop, a gardener's sanctuary. I made my way to the staircase. The banister was cool and solid under my hand. I climbed slowly, the wooden steps creaking under my weight, each sound a punctuation mark in the deep silence. The second floor was one enormous room, an open-plan living space under a high, vaulted ceiling with exposed timber beams. It was a stunning space, even covered in dust. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall. A simple kitchenette was tucked into a corner, its porcelain sink and countertops coated in gray. In the center of the room was a simple wooden table and 2 chairs. And against the far wall, underneath the huge, arched window I'd seen from outside, was a long, sturdy desk. On the desk, in the exact center, was a single object, a wooden box. It wasn't a fancy box. It was plain, made of what looked like cedar, with a simple brass latch. It was the only thing in the entire building that wasn't covered in dust. It was clean, as if it had been wiped down that very morning. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. This was what she wanted me to find. I walked across the room, the floorboards groaning a welcome. The light from the arched window fell directly on the box, illuminating it in the gloom. I reached out and ran my fingers over the smooth, clean wood. It felt warm, alive. My hands were trembling as I unhooked the small brass latch. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded blue velvet, was a stack of letters. They were tied together with a simple silk ribbon. On top of the stack was a single folded sheet of paper. I picked it up. The handwriting was elegant, a looping cursive I vaguely recognized. It said simply, "For Leo, start here." I untied the ribbon. The letters were in thick, cream-colored envelopes, each one numbered in the top right corner. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 12. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This wasn't just a building, it was a story. Her story. And she had left it for me to read. I pulled out the first letter, my fingers fumbling with the seal. I sat down in the dusty chair at the desk, took a deep breath of the time-heavy air, and began to read. The paper was thick and soft, the ink a faded blue. Her handwriting was beautiful, but a little shaky, the loops and swirls full of character. I held it in the beam of light from the window and began to read her words, feeling as though she were whispering them directly into the silent room. "My dearest Leo," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means you are 18. It means you are a man. And it means, I fear, that you are alone. I am so sorry for that. I am sorry for every hard day you have had to face without me, without your mother. Please, believe me when I say that not a day has gone by when I have not thought of you." I had to stop and take a breath. The directness of it, the immediate love, was a physical blow. I'd spent 2 years feeling like a ghost in my own life, and here was a voice from the past, from beyond the grave, seeing me more clearly than anyone had in years. I read on. "There are things you need to know. Things your father, in his grief and his pride, would never have been able to tell you. He was a good man, your father, but he was a simple man. He saw the world in black and white, and what happened with our family was anything but. Let me start with this place, this carriage house. This was my home. It was my parents' home before me. The main house on the estate, the mill house, belonged to a wealthy family who lost everything in the crash. My grandfather, a stonemason, was their groundskeeper. They paid him in land instead of money, giving him this small parcel, this carriage house. It was all we ever had, but we made it a home. I was born in the room you're sitting in now. Your mother was, too. I looked around the vast, dusty space, trying to imagine it filled with life. A baby crying, a mother singing, the smell of cooking instead of the smell of dust. It seemed impossible. When your mother met your father, I was so happy for her. He loved her dearly. But he wanted to pull her into his world, a world of new things, of suburbs and mortgages. He didn't understand this place. He saw it as old, run down. He saw our life here as small. He didn't see the freedom in it, the independence. Your mother was torn. She loved him, but she loved this place too. It was her anchor. Then you were born. And you, my sweet Leo, you were a joy. You had your mother's eyes and my stubborn chin. I remember holding you right here, by this window, and telling you that this place would always be here for you. A safe harbor. My own eyes were starting to burn. I could almost feel it, a phantom memory of being held, of looking out that very window at the green trees. Then your mother got sick. It was fast, and it was cruel. The doctors gave her a year. Your father fell apart. He couldn't accept it. He mortgaged their house to pay for experimental treatments, anything to give him a shred of hope. He drained his savings. He went into terrible debt. But nothing worked. When she was gone, all he had left was his grief and a mountain of bills. This was the part of the story I knew, but hearing it from her perspective made it raw and new. I remembered the hushed conversations, the endless stream of casseroles from neighbors, the way my dad seemed to shrink, to fold in on himself. He was going to lose everything, Leo. The house, his job, everything. He was going to have to declare bankruptcy. And that's when they came for him. The men he owed money to weren't from a bank. He'd gotten desperate. He'd borrowed from the wrong people. They were dangerous. They threatened him. And then they threatened you. The air in the room grew suddenly colder. The dust motes seemed to freeze in the air. I found out from a friend in town. They were watching your school. They knew your routine. They told your father that if he couldn't pay, they would take you as collateral. He was terrified. He didn't know what to do. He came to me for the first time in years. He came here, to this house, broken. He confessed everything. He wanted to sell this place. He said it was the only asset we had left. The developers were already sniffing around then, making offers. He said the money would pay off his debts and set you both up for a new life. He begged me to sell. And I said no. I stopped reading, my knuckles white as I gripped the letter. She said no? She could have saved them, paid off the debt, made them safe. Why would she refuse? It was exactly what my dad had said, that she was difficult, that she'd refuse to help. I know what you must be thinking, the letter continued, as if she could hear my thoughts across time. You must think I was cruel. Selfish. Your father certainly did. He called me a monster. He said I was choosing a pile of stone and wood over my own grandson's safety. He left that night and never spoke to me again. He told everyone I had abandoned you. It was easier, I think, for him to believe that. But Leo, here is the truth. Selling this place wouldn't have saved you. It would have only postponed the danger. Those men, they don't just take their money and leave. They would have seen your father as a source, and they would have kept coming back. And the money would have put a target on your back for the rest of your life. I couldn't let that happen. I had to get you away from them, permanently. I had to make you disappear. So I made a different deal. Not with your father, but with them. I contacted them myself. I met them. I told them I would pay your father's debt, in cash, in full. On one condition. They leave your father and you alone. Forever. They were to forget you existed. They were to consider the debt paid and walk away. And I had a second condition. To ensure your safety, everyone had to believe I had abandoned my family. My reputation was the price of your freedom, Leo. I had to become the villain in your story so that you could have a chance to live it. I could barely see the words through the blur of my tears. It wasn't abandonment. It was a sacrifice, a shield. She hadn't been difficult. She had been a fortress. I sold off everything else I owned. My mother's jewelry, the parcel of land behind the woods. I emptied my accounts. I gathered every penny I had in the world. It was just enough. I paid them, and they kept their word. They vanished. But it left me with nothing. And it left me with a terrible choice. I couldn't come back into your life. The story had to be true. For you to be truly safe, I had to stay away. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. It broke my heart every single day. I left this property in a trust for you, with my lawyer, Alistair, as the executor. I knew the developers would keep trying to buy it. Their greed, I hoped, would inadvertently protect it. No one would bother a worthless old building with a big corporation trying to get it. I made it look dormant, abandoned. I hoped it would be enough to keep it safe until you were old enough to claim it, until you were old enough to understand. This place is not a liability, Leo. It is your sanctuary. It is the only thing of value I had left to give you. It is debt-free. It is owned outright. It is yours. No one can take it from you. There is more to tell you, more you need to find. But for now, just know this. You were never abandoned. You were protected. You were loved, fiercely. All my love, your grandmother, Clara. I folded the letter, my hands shaking so badly I could barely control them. The tears I'd been holding back for 2 years finally came. Not quiet tears, but huge, shuddering sobs that tore through me. I cried for the mother I'd lost. I cried for the father who had lived and died under the weight of a terrible secret. I cried for the grandmother I had misunderstood, a woman who had given up everything, her money, her reputation, her family, just to keep me safe. I sat there in the dusty, silent room, the letter clutched in my hand, and I wept until I had nothing left. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer empty. It was filled with her. The sun had shifted, and the beam of light that had illuminated the desk was now a soft orange glow creeping across the floorboards. I felt hollowed out, scoured clean by grief. The story of my life had been rewritten in the span of 10 minutes. The anger I'd held toward my grandmother's memory had vanished, replaced by a profound, aching gratitude. The resentment I felt toward my father had softened into a deep, tragic pity. He wasn't a man who had been abandoned by his mother. He was a man trapped by pride and fear, who had to create a villain to cope with his own powerlessness. He'd carried that lie to his grave. And Diane, her casual cruelty suddenly made a different kind of sense. To her, I was just the final loose end of her husband's messy, debt-ridden past. This liability of a carriage house was my problem now, not hers. She had no idea she was handing me the keys to my own salvation. I sat there for a long time, just breathing the air of the room, letting the truth of Clara's letter settle into my bones. She hadn't just left me a building, she had left me a truth. She had left me a legacy of strength I never knew I had. A standing offer. $400,000. The words of Mr. Davies echoed in my mind. Before, that number had sounded like a fantasy, a winning lottery ticket. Now it sounded like an insult. Northwood Properties didn't want to buy a piece of land. They wanted to bulldoze my grandmother's sacrifice. They wanted to pave over my mother's birthplace. They wanted to build luxury condos on top of my family's heart. The thought filled me with a cold, hard anger that was completely different from the helpless rage I'd felt for the last 2 years. This was a focused anger, a purposeful anger. I looked around the room again, seeing it not as a dusty, neglected space, but as a fortress. My fortress. The thick stone walls, the heavy timber beams, the slate roof. It had stood for over 100 years. It had sheltered my family. It had waited for me. Selling it would be the real abandonment. It would be spitting on Clara's grave, on the memory of her fierce, selfless love. I knew, with a certainty that was as solid as the stone walls around me, that I couldn't do it. But what was the alternative? I was 18 years old, with a box of clothes and about $43 to my name. The property taxes Diane had mentioned were a real thing. This place needed work. It needed heat, water, electricity. It needed to be brought back to life. How could I possibly do that? I felt a surge of the old panic, the familiar feeling of being small and overwhelmed. "There is more to tell you," she'd written. "More you need to find." I looked at the cedar box. 11 more letters. And Mr. Davies had mentioned a safe deposit box. Clara was a planner. She had orchestrated my survival from beyond the grave. She wouldn't have led me here just to watch me fail. She must have left me the tools I needed. The thought steadied me. This was a test, yes, but it wasn't a test of my strength alone. It was a test of my faith in her. I stood up, my joints stiff. I carefully placed the first letter back in its envelope and set it on the desk. I needed to think. I needed a plan. The first step was simple. I had to explore my inheritance. Properly. I went back downstairs, my perspective completely changed. I was no longer an intruder. I was the custodian, the heir. The ground floor was cold, and the evening light was fading fast. I ran my hand along the fender of the old Ford truck, seafoam green. It was a cheerful, optimistic color. Maybe she'd left it for me. A crazy thought, but no crazier than anything else I'd learned today. I found a light switch on the wall near the door. I flicked it hopefully. Nothing. Of course. The power had likely been off for years. I'd need to get that sorted out. That would cost money. Money I didn't have. Don't panic, I told myself. One step at a time. What would Clara do? She was practical, resourceful. I looked at the workbench where I'd left my box. It was a solid piece of furniture, built from thick planks of wood, scarred with the marks of countless projects. There were drawers underneath. I pulled one open. It slid out smoothly, no sticking. Inside, neatly organized, were tools. Wrenches, screwdrivers, pliers, all clean and free of rust, resting in felt-lined compartments. I opened another drawer. Hammers, chisels, saws. It was a complete, well-cared-for workshop. In the bottom drawer, I found a collection of old oil lamps and a tin of lamp oil, still nearly full. There was also a box of matches, a small, practical gift from the past. I took out one of the lamps, a simple glass one with a brass base. My hands were clumsy as I filled it, trimmed the wick, and lit it. A soft golden light bloomed in the growing darkness, pushing back the shadows. It smelled of kerosene and home. Holding the lamp aloft, I felt like an explorer in an ancient ruin. The flickering light cast dancing shadows on the cobblestones and stone walls. I decided to make a full circuit of the ground floor. I checked the foundation, running my hand along the massive stone blocks. Solid. I checked the heavy timber beams supporting the second floor. They were thick as my body, and the wood was hard and unrotted. This place was built to last. When I got to the back of the carriage house, I found another door, smaller and heavier than the one at the front. It was bolted from the inside with a thick iron slide. I lifted the heavy bolt, the sound of metal scraping on metal echoing in the space. I pulled the door open and was met with a rush of cold night air. I stepped out into a small, walled-in courtyard. It was overgrown with weeds, but I could see the outlines of what had once been a magnificent garden. Stone-lined flower beds, a brick patio, and in the center, a stone bird bath, green with moss. Even in its neglected state, it was beautiful. It was peaceful. This must have been her sanctuary. I could picture her out here, her hands in the dirt, the sun on her back. This was the place she had fought to protect. I went back inside, bolted the door, and carried the lamp back upstairs. The single flame did little to illuminate the vast upper room, but it made the space feel more intimate, cozier. I wasn't ready to read the next letter, not yet. I needed to let the first one settle. I needed to just be here. I went back to the front of the house and looked out the small window beside the door. The woods were a wall of blackness. There were no streetlights out here, no neighbors, just the moon and the stars, which were beginning to appear in the clear, cold sky. I was completely, utterly alone. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel lonely. I felt anchored. I had a place. I had a purpose. The choice was clear. There was no $400,000. There was only this house. My house. The first thing I had to do was survive the night. I didn't have a bed, but I had a roof over my head. I went back downstairs and grabbed the heavy canvas tarpaulin from the truck. It was dusty, but it was thick and warm. I carried it upstairs and laid it out on the floor near the cold fireplace. I retrieved my box of belongings and took out the only blanket I owned. I wrapped myself in it, using my jacket as a pillow. Lying on the hard floor, wrapped in a dusty tarp, with $43 in my pocket and no electricity or running water, I should have been terrified. But I wasn't. I felt a strange sense of peace. I was home. Before I drifted off to sleep, I made a silent promise to the woman who had saved me. "I'll fix it, Grandma," I whispered into the darkness. "I'll make you proud." The next morning, I woke up stiff and cold, but resolute. The first light was filtering through the grimy, arched window, painting the dusty air in shades of gray and pale yellow. My first priority was survival. I had a little cash, but it wouldn't last long. I needed a job, and I needed to get the utilities turned on. But before any of that, I had another stop to make: the safe deposit box. I folded the tarp neatly and put it back on the truck, patting the cool metal of the hood like it was a faithful old dog. I grabbed the small brass key Mr. Davies had given me, locked the carriage house door behind me, and started the walk back into town. The cold morning air felt good, clean. The world seemed sharper, more defined than it had yesterday. I felt a sense of purpose humming in my veins. The bank was a formidable stone building on Main Street, right across from the lawyer's office. I felt self-conscious walking in, my clothes rumpled from sleeping on the floor, my hair a mess. But the teller was polite, and when I explained I was there to access a safe deposit box left to me by Clara Vance, she led me to a quiet office where a friendly-faced manager named Mrs. Gable was waiting. She checked my ID, which I still had from my wallet, and compared my signature to the one on Clara's file. "Everything seems to be in order, Mr. Vance," she said with a warm smile. "Your grandmother was a lovely woman. We all miss her." She led me into the vault. The air was cool and still. It felt like walking into a sanctuary of secrets. She used her key and my key to open a small metal door, then slid out a long, narrow box and handed it to me. "You can use one of the private viewing rooms," she said, gesturing to a small, wood-paneled booth. I thanked her and carried the box into the room, closing the door behind me. It felt heavier than it should. I sat down and lifted the lid. My breath hitched. The box was filled with cash. Neat stacks of $100 bills, bundled with paper bands. I started pulling them out, my hands shaking. 1 stack, 2, 3. I counted them. There were 10 stacks, each with $5,000. $50,000. I just stared at it. It was an impossible amount of money. It was a lifeline. It was a miracle. It was Clara. Of course. She hadn't left me to fend for myself. She had provided. This was the money she'd saved after paying off my father's debt, the remnants of her liquidated life, saved and hidden away for me. Underneath the cash was a thick envelope. I opened it. Inside was a simple, hand-drawn map of the Carriage House property and another letter in her familiar script. "Leo," it began, "I hope this is enough to get you started. Use it wisely. Get the power and water turned on. Buy yourself some food and some warm clothes. The old truck in the garage runs. The keys are in the glove box and the title is with them. It was your grandfather's. He loved that truck. I saved it for you. The most important thing is the well. The map will show you where it is, behind the garden wall. The town water is fine, but our well water is clean and sweet, and more importantly, it's free. The pump will need to be serviced, but it's a simple mechanical pump built to last. Independence, Leo. That's the most valuable thing in the world. Don't ever be dependent on a system that can cut you off. Pay your property taxes first. They're not high, but they are non-negotiable. Stay ahead of them. Alistair can help you with the paperwork. Be smart. Be frugal. This money is a tool, not a prize. Use it to build, not to spend. I love you. Now get to work, Clara." I laughed, a real, actual laugh that started deep in my chest. Get to work. Even in a letter, she was practical, no nonsense. I carefully packed the money and the letter back into the envelope and tucked it deep inside my jacket. I felt like I was carrying a bomb. $50,000. It changed everything. It wasn't just a dream anymore. I could actually do this. I walked out of the bank feeling 10 feet tall. My first stop was the town utility office. I paid the deposits to have the electricity and water turned on at 112 Old Mill Road. They said a technician could be out by the afternoon. Next, I went to the county clerk's office and paid the property taxes for the entire year. The clerk, a woman with a kind face, looked at the address. "The old Vance place," she said with a smile. Clara was a character. Glad to see someone's taking care of it. It seemed everyone in this town had known and liked her. The story my father had told me, the lie she had been forced to live, had stayed in his world, not hers. Here, she was remembered for who she really was. My last stop before heading back was a hardware store. I bought a heavy-duty flashlight, a new lock for the door, work gloves, cleaning supplies, a bucket, and a sponge. Then I went to a small grocery store and bought bread, cheese, apples, and a large jug of water. Laden with my supplies, I walked back to the Carriage House. It looked different in the full light of day, less mysterious and more like a project waiting to begin. The first thing I did was go to the old Ford. I opened the driver's side door. The air inside was stale but clean. I opened the glove box. Just as she'd said, there was a set of keys and the official vehicle title signed over to me. I put the key in the ignition, not really expecting anything. I turned it. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then, with a deep, rumbling roar, it came to life. It actually worked. I sat there, stunned, as the engine settled into a steady, powerful rhythm. My grandfather's truck. My truck. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a frenzy of activity. I swept the thickest layers of dust from the upstairs living area. I washed the windows, letting in streams of clear, bright light. The space was transformed. It was no longer a gloomy cavern, but a bright, airy loft with incredible potential. Late in the afternoon, the utility truck arrived. The technician was a young guy about my age named Sam. He was friendly and curious about the old place. He got the power on in less than an hour. When he flicked the main breaker, The lights I'd tried the night before flickered on, dim at first, then steady. The simple fact of electric light felt like a monumental victory. Sam helped me check the water. We turned the main valve, and after a series of groans and clanks from the pipes, water gushed from the tap in the upstairs sink. It was brown at first, full of rust and sediment, but after a few minutes, it ran clear. "You're all set," Sam said, wiping his hands on a rag. "This place is built like a fortress. Good bones." Good bones. That's what Clara had left me. That night, I didn't sleep on the floor. I read the second letter from the box. It was all about the garden. She described every plant she had ever grown, the cycle of the seasons, the joy of pulling food from the earth. It wasn't just a letter, it was a manual, a guide to living off the land she had left me. After I finished reading, I sat at the old wooden table, the room lit by a single bare bulb, and ate a simple meal of bread and cheese. It was the best meal I had ever eaten. I had a home. I had a plan. I had work to do. And for the first time, I had hope. A deep, solid, and unshakable hope. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. I woke up with the sun, my body aching from labor it wasn't used to, but my mind clear. I spent the mornings cleaning. I scrubbed floors, washed walls, and cleared out decades of accumulated junk from the old horse stalls. I found treasures in the dust, old tools, a stack of National Geographic magazines from the 70s, a child's wooden horse with one rocker missing. Each object was a small piece of the lives lived here. In the afternoons, I worked on the garden. Following the instructions in Clara's letters, I was reading one each night, I started by clearing the weeds from the stone-lined beds. The soil underneath was dark and rich. She had spent a lifetime nurturing it. It was a slow, back-breaking process, but with every weed I pulled, I felt like I was reclaiming not just the land, but a piece of myself. I bought a cheap mattress and a sleeping bag in town and a small electric hot plate to cook on. I was living simply, but I was living well. A week after I arrived, I got my first official piece of mail. It was a letter from Northwood Properties, forwarded by Mr. Davies. It was a formal, aggressive letter reiterating their offer of $400,000 and stating that the offer was final and time-sensitive. It hinted at legal action to claim the property through eminent domain for community development if I refused to be reasonable. It was a threat wrapped in corporate jargon. I read it, and I felt nothing but a cold resolve. I took the letter, walked downstairs, and tacked it to the wall of the workshop. A reminder of what I was fighting against. That afternoon, I called Mr. Davies. "I got the letter from Northwood," I said, my voice steady. "Good," he replied. "I assume you'll be accepting their offer. I can have the paperwork ready by Friday." There was a pause. "Mr. Davies," I said, "I'm not selling." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. I could almost hear him processing my words. "Leo," he said finally, his voice careful. $400,000 is a life-changing amount of money for a young man in your position. Are you sure you've thought this through?" "I've thought it through," I said, looking around the sunlit loft that was slowly becoming my home. "This place is not for sale. Not for any price." "They won't give up easily," he warned. "They have deep pockets and a team of lawyers who are very good at getting what they want." "My grandmother didn't give up," I replied. "Neither will I." I could hear a faint smile in his voice when he spoke again. "All right, Leo. All right. In that case, you're going to need a zoning variance if you want to live there legally. It's currently zoned as an outbuilding, not a residence, and you'll need to bring it up to code. That's what they'll use against you. They'll report you to the county and try to have the place condemned." "What do I need to do?" I asked. "I'll send you the paperwork," he said. "But you'll need proper plumbing, a certified heat source, insulation. It's a long list. It will be expensive." "I have some money," I said. My grandmother left me some. I see, he said, a note of understanding in his voice. Clara always did have a plan. All right, son, let's get to work. Get to work. The phrase gave me a jolt of strength. This was the next part of the test, the fight. And I wasn't alone. I had Clara's money, and I had Mr. Davies in my corner. The next few weeks were a blur of hard work and bureaucracy. Mr. Davies sent over a mountain of paperwork for the zoning variance. I spent my evenings at the big table, filling out forms by lamplight, trying to make sense of the legal and technical language. During the day, I worked on the house. I hired a local plumber to inspect the old pipes. He told me the main lines were solid cast iron and in good shape, but the fixtures and connections needed updating. I hired an electrician to replace the ancient knob and tube wiring, which was a fire hazard. These two things alone ate up nearly half of Clara's money. Panic flared in me, but I pushed it down. This was an investment. This was what the money was for, to build. As the weather drew colder, I knew my next priority had to be heat. The old stone fireplace was beautiful, but it wouldn't be enough to heat the whole space. Clara's next letter, which I read the night the plumber finished his work, seemed to anticipate my problem. Leo, it said, winter in this valley is no joke. The fireplace is the heart of the home, but you'll need more. In the back of the workshop, behind the stacks of old lumber, you'll find the stove your great-grandfather bought. It's a wood-burning stove, a big cast-iron beast. He used it to heat his workshop in the winters. It's efficient, and it will keep the whole place warm, as long as you have wood to feed it. The woods on our property are full of fallen oak. It's hard work, but it's free fuel. Remember what I said about independence. The next morning, I went to the back of the workshop. Behind a pile of weathered gray planks, there it was, a huge, black, pot-bellied wood stove. It was covered in dust, but seemed to be in perfect condition. It took me the better part of a day, with the help of a rented dolly, to move the massive stove upstairs and install it, running the stovepipe up through the old chimney flue. It was the hardest physical work I had ever done. That evening, I split some of the fallen oak I'd gathered from the woods and built my first fire in the stove. The iron creaked and groaned as it heated up, and then a deep, penetrating warmth began to radiate through the room. It was a living heat, completely different from the dry, sterile heat of a furnace. It was the heat of my own labor. I sat in front of it, feeling the warmth on my face, and felt a sense of pride so deep it almost hurt. I was doing it. I was building a life. The notice from the county arrived a week later. It was a formal complaint filed by Northwood Properties, citing code violations and demanding an inspection. They were making their move. Mr. Davies called me. It's started, he said. They've scheduled an inspection for 2 weeks from now. If we don't pass, they can get a court order to have you removed. Will we pass? I asked, my heart sinking. We've done a lot, but it's not finished. You have new wiring and safe plumbing, he said. You have a certified heat source. The foundation is solid. That's the big stuff. The inspector is a man named George Miller. He's a fair man. He knew your grandmother. Just be honest with him. Show him the work you've done. Show him the work you're planning to do. The 2 weeks leading up to the inspection were the most frantic of my life. I worked from sunrise until long after sunset. I installed insulation. I patched the plaster on the walls. I repaired the missing slate tiles on the roof, a terrifying job that had me clinging to a ladder 2 stories up. I used the last of Clara's money to buy a simple new toilet and a small water heater. Every dollar was accounted for. Every ounce of my energy was poured into the house. The day of the inspection, I was a nervous wreck. I had cleaned the place from top to bottom. A fire was burning cheerfully in the wood stove. My plans for the next phase of renovations were laid out neatly on the table. George Miller arrived exactly on time. He was a big man with a quiet, serious demeanor. He didn't say much as I walked him through the property. He checked the wiring, the plumbing, the foundation. He looked at the new roof tiles. He noted the insulation. He spent a long time looking at my plans on the table. Finally, he stood in the middle of the big room and looked around. "You've done a lot of work here, son," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I have a lot more to do," I said quickly. "I'm saving up for new windows, and I'm going to refinish the floors. I'm going to replant the garden in the spring." He nodded slowly. "Northwood is putting a lot of pressure on my office. They want this place condemned." My stomach clenched. "But it's not condemned," he continued, looking me straight in the eye. "It's a work in progress. It's a home. Clara would be proud of you." He took out his clipboard and made a few notes. "You'll get your certificate of occupancy next week," he said. "You passed." I couldn't speak. I just nodded, a huge wave of relief washing over me. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Just so you know," he said, a small smile touching his lips, "I'm rejecting Northwood's application for an eminent domain seizure. They claimed it was for a public access road. But I happen to know there's another, perfectly good access point, a quarter-mile down the river." They were lying. He tipped his hat and was gone. I had won. I had actually won. That night, I celebrated. I made a big pot of soup on the hot plate and sat in front of the wood stove, feeling the warmth and the victory. I had saved my home. I took out the cedar box. There was only one letter left. Number 12. I had saved it, not wanting the conversation with my grandmother to end. But now it felt right. It felt like the end of a chapter. I opened the last letter. It was different from the others, shorter. Her handwriting was more frail. "My dearest Leo," it began. "If you are reading this, you have come to the end of my letters, but I hope it is the beginning of your story. There is one last secret this house has to tell. I couldn't write it down before. It was too dangerous. But Alistair knows. He will tell you when the time is right. When you have proven you are of Vance. When you have shown you have the strength to protect this place. Your great-grandfather was a stonemason, a very good one. He was clever. When he built the fireplace in this room, he built it with a secret. Trust Alistair. Trust this house. It will protect you, as it has always protected us. Live a good life, Leo. Be happy. Find love. Plant a garden. And never, ever let them pave over our home. Forever yours, Clara." A secret in the fireplace. I ran my hands over the cool, smooth stones of the hearth. What had she hidden? I didn't know, but I knew I had earned the right to find out. My fight wasn't over. Northwood Properties wouldn't give up. But now I knew I had one last card to play. A secret left for me by a clever stonemason and the grandmother who had given me everything. The next day, I called Mr. Davies. "I passed the inspection," I told him, the pride still buzzing in my voice. "I knew you would," he said, and I could hear the genuine warmth in his tone. "George Miller is a good man. He doesn't like bullies." He told me he rejected Northwood's eminent domain claim. Yes, I saw the filing. They're furious. Their lawyers are trying to appeal, but George's report was ironclad. "You've won this round, Leo." "There's something else," I said, taking a breath. I read Clara's last letter. She said there's a secret in the fireplace. She said you knew about it. The line was silent for a moment. Then Mr. Davies sighed. "Ah, so you've reached that part of the journey. I wondered when you would." "Yes, I know. Clara gave me very specific instructions. I was not to tell you until you had proven your commitment to the property. Until you had faced down Northwood and chosen to stay. You've done that, and then some." "What is it?" I asked, my heart starting to pound. "It's not something I can explain over the phone," he said. "Can you come to my office this afternoon? Say around 3? The hours until 3 o'clock crawled by. I tried to work in the garden, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept returning to the fireplace, to its solid, silent stones. What could be hidden inside? Money? More letters? A weapon? My imagination ran wild. At 3 sharp, I was sitting in the same chair in Mr. Davies's office where my journey had begun. He looked at me, a long, appraising look. "You look different, Leo," he said. "You've grown into yourself." "This place, it changes you," I admitted. He nodded. Clara knew it would. He reached into a drawer in his large desk and pulled out a long, thin, sealed envelope. It was old, the paper yellowed at the edges. My name was written on the front in Clara's hand. "She left this with me 8 years ago," he said, sliding it across the desk. "It's a letter of instruction from her and a legal affidavit signed by her father, your great-grandfather, Thomas Vance, dated 1934. I took the envelope. It felt impossibly important. "What does it say?" "It says, Mr." Davies leaned forward, his voice low, "that the deed for this property is not what it appears to be. When the Millhouse estate was broken up, your great-grandfather was given his parcel. But the family he worked for, the Ashworths, were in a great deal of trouble. They were losing everything, but they were clever. They wanted to protect the one piece of the estate that truly mattered to them, the river access and the water rights associated with it." My mind flashed back to the developer's brochure. River's Edge Estates. The river was the key. "The Ashworths couldn't keep the land in their own name," Mr. Davies continued, "so they made a secret deal with their most trusted employee, Thomas Vance. The official deed, the one on file with the county, shows your parcel ending 100 feet from the riverbank. That's what Northwood has seen. That's what they think they are buying." He paused, letting the suspense build. But Thomas and Mr. Ashworth drew up a second, private deed. A legal, notarized document that grants your parcel, the Carriage House parcel, an additional 50-foot easement right to the riverbank itself. And more importantly, it grants the owner of the parcel primary water rights from that section of the river. The original document is in that envelope. It supersedes the public record. I stared at him, my mind struggling to grasp the implications. Water rights? The most valuable commodity of all, Leo. Northwood's entire plan for their luxury condos depends on having river access for a marina and using river water for their landscaping and utilities. Their current plans show their main water intake valve located directly in the center of your easement. Without your permission, which comes with those water rights, their entire multi-million-dollar project is dead in the water. They can't build. I was speechless. It was a masterstroke, a hidden checkmate planned almost a century ago. "Your grandmother knew this, of course," Mr. Davies said. "It was her trump card. But she knew how dangerous it was. If the wrong people had known about that document before you were ready, they would have done anything to get it. That's why she hid it. That's why she built the legend of the worthless Carriage House. It was all a magnificent deception. A fortress of stories to protect a single piece of paper. And the fireplace?" I asked, my voice a whisper. "The affidavit from your great-grandfather specifies the exact location of the original boundary marker. According to him, he sunk one of the original granite estate markers into the foundation of the fireplace itself as a permanent, immovable record of the true property line. The fireplace isn't just in the house, it is the corner of your property." I finally understood. The secret wasn't in the fireplace. The fireplace was the secret. It was a permanent, physical testament to the truth. I walked home in a daze. The world felt unreal, shimmering. I had gone from being a homeless kid with nothing, to the owner of a liability, to the custodian of a home, and now, to the sole person holding the key to a massive corporate development. Back in the loft, I went straight to the fireplace. I ran my hands over the stones, seeing it with new eyes. It wasn't just a hearth, it was a monument, a declaration. I didn't need to break it open. The document in my hand was the weapon. The fireplace was the proof. The next morning, I sent a registered letter to the CEO of Northwood Properties with a copy to Mr. Davies. It was a short letter. It simply said, "To whom it may concern, please be advised that my property at 112 Old Mill Road includes a 50-foot riverfront easement and primary water rights as detailed in the attached legal affidavit. Any attempt to build on or draw water from this section of the river will be met with immediate legal action. My home is not for sale. It never will be. Sincerely, Leo Vance, owner." The response was immediate and seismic. The day after the letter was delivered, all construction activity on the adjacent parcels stopped. A week later, Mr. Davies called me. "They want to meet," he said. There was a note of undisguised triumph in his voice. "They're not threatening anymore. They're begging." "I'm not interested," I said. "I think you should hear them out," he advised. "You hold all the cards, Leo. You don't have to sell, but you can dictate terms. You can ensure this place is protected forever." I agreed. The meeting was held at Mr. Davies' office. Two men in expensive suits from Northwood sat across the table from me. They looked tired and defeated. They offered me money. A lot of it. They started at $1 million, just for the water rights. I said no. They went to $2 million. I said no. "What do you want?" the CEO finally asked, exasperated. "It's not for sale," I repeated calmly. "But I'll make you a deal. You want to build your condos? Fine. But you will redraft your entire site plan. You will move your entire development 200 feet back from my property line, creating a permanent, undeveloped green space. You will fund a conservation trust to maintain that green space and the riverbank in perpetuity. You will make a sizable donation to the Coldwater Town Historical Society in my grandmother's name. And you will pay for the complete, museum-quality restoration of my home, the Carriage House, to be overseen by an architectural preservationist of my choosing." They stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. That's insane," the lawyer sputtered. "Is it?" I asked, leaning forward. "Or you can walk away from your $100 million investment right now. Your choice." It took them a week, but they agreed to every single one of my terms. The contracts were ironclad, drawn up by Mr. Davies to be unbreakable. I had not only saved my home, I had protected my grandmother's legacy and a piece of the town she loved. The restoration work began that spring. A team of artisans and craftsmen, people who respected old buildings, descended on the Carriage House. They restored the slate roof, repointed the stonework, and installed new, historically accurate windows. They sanded and refinished the original wooden floors until they glowed. I worked alongside them every day, learning from them, my hands helping to bring the old place back to its full glory. I replanted Clara's garden, using her letters as my guide. I found the old well, serviced the pump, and drank the cold, sweet water that came from deep in the earth. I got the old Ford truck repainted, its seafoam green shining in the sun. It looked brand new. The house was no longer just a shelter. It was a living, breathing part of me. It was a testament to the idea that the most valuable things are not the ones that can be bought or sold. Home isn't about the money you can get for it. It's about the life you can build in it. It's about the sacrifices that were made to keep it safe. It's about the roots that hold you steady when the world tries to knock you down. I often sit at the great wooden desk by the arched window, the cedar box of Clara's letters beside me. I look out at the trees, at the sliver of river I can see in the distance, and I feel a profound sense of peace. I was the boy who got kicked out with nothing but a box and a key to a worthless building. But my grandmother knew. She knew that what she was leaving me wasn't a liability. It was an identity. It was a history. It was a future. She didn't just give me a house, she gave me a home, and in doing so, she gave me back to myself. This journey taught me that some inheritances can't be measured in dollars. They're measured in strength, in love, and in the sacrifices that echo through generations. And sometimes, the most broken down places hold the most powerful secrets. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. This story is deeply personal, and sharing it isn't easy. But I believe in the power of sharing our stories, especially the hard ones. It's how we find connection. It's how we know we're not alone. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt lost and then found your way, or if you're still searching for your own carriage house, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to the channel. Let's build a community here, a place where stories like ours can be told and heard. And please, leave a comment below. Tell me about a time you found strength you didn't know you had, or what the word home means to you. I'll be reading every single one. Because we all have a story, and every story deserves to be heard. Thank you.